Hello, everybody. Is this our fourth live chat about Vast Grimm? We were originally planning tonight to talk to Brian Cohen and Ross Brandt specifically about the writing for the game, but Ross couldn't join us tonight. So we're still going to talk about the writing for the game and writing for RPG games. But instead of Ross, we have David LaRocca in the group again.
Happy to be back.
Yes.
I do
So
not write. I'm not a wordsmith.
that's okay. We forgive you.
this time.
Yes.
As we all know, in this group at least, Vast Grimm is a super awesome, disgusting space sci-fi RPG, funding now on GameFound, has alien worm infections, of course. And Brian, you are the primary writer. Well, you and Ross are the primary writers of the game.
hmm
And David, you are one of the primary artists of the game. And I'm Lat from Team Infinite Black, and I'm going to be probing your brains for whatever information I can find.
Excellent.
So I hope you're ready for that.
I hope so as well. Hopefully, you will get good little nuggets out of the brains.
Yes, hopefully so. My first question is for you, Brian.
Yes.
Tell us about your background in writing leading up to Vast Grimm, because
Okay.
Vast Grimm is not your first writing endeavor.
It is not, and it's weird because I've never really, and I still don't really consider myself a writer, only because in my head I could never sit down and pen a novel. That's the way words come out of me do not work in that long form context. I think writing for me has always kind of evolved and revolved around visual storytelling, and especially reading so many comic books growing up and self-publishing my first comic book in 1999 and then another series in 2004. I've always wanted the visuals to kind of lead the way with the story, and then the words are more to just add that extra bit of flavor and that extra bit of personality and character. And that has kind of carried on into Vast Grimm. But before Vast Grimm, I also wrote the foundation for my 5e campaign setting, World of Revolo, and the Bestiary, where I also had my friend Isaac Skaggs do a whole lot of the writing along with it, and he helped develop that out more. I feel that a lot of my writing is also very much around the core concepts of things and the ideas that blossom, and then finding little bits and pieces to really focus in on to give those a lot of character and personality. So it's little chunks of really flavor-filled writing that's in Vast Grimm, as opposed to long prose about the setting and how it's come to be.
Your World of Revolo, you mentioned, that's got kind of an interesting story behind it, I believe. So you kind of wrote that and structured the creatures around things your son came up with, right?
Kind of. Originally, I started developing the world before my son was born, when my wife was pregnant with him. I sculpted my first large, what I consider life-size creature back then, and when I sculpted it, I started everything I made because of the comic book background. Any character or creature, I always wanted there to be some sort of story with it. So I started building a story around that character, and once I built that first character, I realized that I wanted to create a world that my kid could then add to. So I named the world Revolo, which is his middle name, Oliver, backwards.
Oh,
And
I
as
didn't realize that.
yeah, and as he got older, he drew a couple of creatures, and I'd try and pick his brain for ideas, and he'd contribute a little bit. And he didn't make a ton of them, but like a handful of the species that are in the setting and why certain locations like the volcanoes are right next to the icy divide, like the fiery pits and the icy divide are right next to each other. Those were all things while I was drawing the initial map before I got a real cartographer to do it. It was his input on that side. And then as he got older, my daughter started giving some ideas, and I have a whole nother continent that I eventually have to get back to develop, because she's had a ton of ideas that are all very valuable, that could help build out even more in that whole world setting.
I didn't realize until just now, Revelo and Vast Grimm both started as a sculpture, and that sculpture inspired you to think about that world and what that world and universe would be like.
Yeah, that's how my brain tends to go. If I start making a character, it's okay. Where does it go from here? Because there's got to be a backstory to that character. There's got to be more to what this thing is. It can't just be something weird and funky hanging on the wall.
In fiction writing,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times you will see guides or tips to writing that will recommend that you start with interesting characters because the plot should depend on the characters. And you'll often see some books getting criticized, or not just books, but movies, any kind of writing, for if they're just too plot focused. Because sometimes if stuff's too plot focused, it forces the characters into unrealistic situations that don't really fit their character. For writing for like RPG games, it's a little different because you don't really necessarily control all the characters,
Right.
and you don't necessarily control the plot either.
No.
Some of it. So what do you think is the most important starting point for writing like a creative and good adventure?
You have to think of it as like the really big broad strokes as to what is happening in either the world or the universe that you're writing in. Like, what are big things that are going to happen most likely, and things that you could say happen whether or not other people that play in the setting are integral to that storyline. Big story arcs that are going to happen, so that, like, if you wanted to write this out as a movie trilogy, what's going to happen in this first movie, what's going to happen in the second one and the third, just to have an idea of where it could go. And then, but leave it open enough that if people are playing themselves and they have a way to affect that outcome, and it doesn't necessarily, whatever happens at their table could be completely different than the direction that you think it would go. So you just have to kind of have big story concepts without forcing and railroading people in a certain direction that they have to go in. Part of the thing with Vast Grimm is it's really big concepts as to what's going on in the universe, but it's not completely drilled down to the point where, like, well, if they don't do this, then their legion is definitely never going to get anywhere. You want to leave that completely open to interpretation, especially as somebody that's always preferred to run their own homebrew kind of games or stories and not really rely on adventures, like pre-written adventures, as much. I wanted to leave it as open-ended as possible so that you could really make it your own.
Brian, I know you run a lot of games as the game master, but I'm assuming that you've also been a player in a lot of games too. As a player and a game master sort of is controlling the story too much, does it bother you?
Not really, because honestly, I don't play nearly as much as I GM. And when I do play, I tend to go, my characters tend to be a little over the top. I think just because I usually have to play so many different characters when I'm a GM. And most of the time, it's not super railroady, the games that I have played in, especially in recent years. But I've also, most of the people I play with are people that I've played with between 10 to 20 years. Not on a regular basis, because we're all old and life gets in the way, but people that I've known for a long time, and we know how each other play. We know the type of characters each other tends to play, and it's really just about having fun and like telling the story together at the table.
And I think that the best GMs will let their players, ultimately it's the player's decision where their characters go, where the game goes. And good GMs will figure out ways of trying to guide players in a direction, but not force them into that direction. Honestly, I feel sorry for a lot of GMs, because I mean, how many times have you heard of somebody, spending a lot of time on the next adventure, hours and hours drawing maps and things like that, and then all of a sudden, one of the players sees a shiny and goes in the complete opposite direction and never visits the place that they just worked, hours or maybe even weeks on.
Quite often.
Yeah,
I've seen that happen.
But the most fun games are the ones where, the players at least feel like they're in total control. Some of the weakest games I ever played in were the ones where the GM was literally forcing you to do what they wanted you to do, as opposed to, what you felt was a natural way for your character to go.
I've played in games of various descriptions with some people that definitely have control the story so you feel like almost like you're on a train track.
Yep.
Like you can't veer off of it, and if you try, they kind of push you back onto it.
We were playing one time with Bruce. He had worked on one of those things where he had this elaborate event, and it was coming down. And one of the people in our party to start the night decided that he needed to go get some gear. So we ended up traveling to some wizard's tower and spending days and days and days there. And then when we finally get back to the city that we were in, we find that it's been completely burned down and everybody's been killed. And if we wouldn't have gone off in that stupid direction to go and buying, magic items or whatever, we would have been able to potentially save the city. But he created this living world with a ticking clock. If we were there, then great. But if we weren't there, then everybody's going to die, and there was repercussions for, the decisions that we made. So even though he spent all that time creating that thing in his world, that clock was ticking, and he didn't even get to introduce it to us. It was just ashes when we got back. Yeah.
It's nice, but it's too bad he never got to go through all that part.
Yeah, I know it. I felt bad for him.
Yeah, I come from the mindset of I try and do as much as I can on the fly, just because it's as a GM for me, it's more enjoyable if I have to think on my feet and make things up as I go, as opposed to have something that's very scripted.
You're really great at that, man. I mean, I'm not just saying that; it's the truth.
Thank you.
I come from a game where, like I said, the GM spends weeks and months and interlocking wheels within wheels and all this other stuff. And so when I started playing with you as the GM in Vast Grimm, I just assumed that the way you were presenting the game and everything, that you had done the same thing, only to find out that it was the exact opposite. You had no clue where we were going or what we were going to do, and you just totally freestyled the whole thing based on those adventure sparks and things.
Yeah, I'm making handwritten lists of new adventure sparks to go in future publications because I want more of them. It's like I want lots of lists of different random things that could happen anytime a legion gets together to play.
For Vast Grimm, what would you consider to be the broad strokes in the game world that players will experience and also game masters will like pick up and reuse?
The broad strokes are, one is the ticking clock element that is the torments that are occurring, that you have to roll to see if torment occurs every day, and once 7 torments happen, that the worms have consumed everything and everything's just over. The other broad stroke is the concept of the Gate of Infinite Stars, that there is a rumor that these engineers and scientists are building something to get you out of this universe and into like a parallel universe or a multiverse. So those are the two big broad strokes that I think will be consistent from campaign to campaign. There will be some element of both of those, I think, in almost every campaign that people run.
I mean, torments are happening, but it's not the same exact torment that's happening in everybody's universe, everybody's game, or whatever. That's all random.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And you have to kind of interpret what the torment really is, because they are sort of, they hint at something really bad, and even they sometimes I think are a little bit specific, but they don't exactly tell you what to do as the game master, right?
Right. They're very much prophecies, and they could happen on the exoplanet that your legion is on right now, or they could happen on the other side of the universe. But no matter what happens when it's read, that torment occurs. Like there's some that are more specific, like all electronics on the Proxima B go dead for 36 hour for three cycles of the moon, or things like that. Or others are much more philosophical, and you have to interpret that however the GM would see fit.
The last torment is the end of the universe, right?
Yes. Yeah. They win. They consume everything. Humanity is lost.
So let's say that a group hits that torment, and I guess the storyline, whatever it was, ends. Do you think they should start over at that point with a new game and a new sort of timeline? Or do you imagine that maybe something happens afterwards? Is it truly the end?
I
What
don't
would
know.
you do, Brian?
What would I do? I would get
Yeah.
every single copy of Vast Grimm and set it on fire. Oh no,
Uh,
wait, no, no. I would
Instead of
probably
doing that, Ryan,
yeah.
instead of doing that, I'll just use one of my favors to re-roll.
Perfect, excellent. No,
Everybody can keep their book. You don't need to light them on fire.
fair enough, fair enough. I would probably start everybody over. We'd start with the new Legion and start at the beginning again, and see where it goes. Unless if everybody found a way to help create the Gate of Infinite Stars and everybody escaped and made it to a different multiverse, I think you would just keep playing using the same rules, and who knows, maybe the Grimm would follow somehow.
oh, that definitely sounds like where the Morkborg compatibility comes in, where your players end up in the Morkborg world.
Oh yeah,
So
you could
they
totally
they
do
go
that.
back in time and really are in almost the same situation. Everything's still screwed.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's still terrible.
And they don't have any batteries.
No,
Right.
no, your batteries run out real quick, and then you gotta pick up a femur and use that to hit somebody with.
That does bring up a good question, though. I think, can players use a favor on a torment roll?
It doesn't specifically say in the rules that they can, so I think that's up to the GM's discretion. Honestly, depending on how you're playing and what die you choose to start with your campaign to roll for torments, it could take quite a long time for 7 torments to occur, unless you have really terrible rolls and get a 1 almost every single time. So you could play Vast Grimm for a good chunk of time and really see a campaign build and characters develop over the course of that time.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I don't know.
I would say the easy answer to that, and I would think that it would be a no.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'd let it, because part of the fun is watching disaster happen. You know,
Oh, definitely.
when somebody uses when somebody uses the magic in the world and they fumble and a cataclysmic condemnation occurs, the stuff that we've written into that is just so ridiculous that you can't, like me, I kind of want to see it happen, because it's terrible and it's funny, and all the people that I've had things like that happen to at the table, it always makes everybody laugh just because it's so terrible.
I've never laughed so hard in a game than I have in Vast Grimm.
Part of that, I think, is Lat's character.
I'm pretty sure it was.
I have been told by other people I've played with that I cause problems in the game because I've never played. I just can't play RPG games and like in that really serious tone, where I'm like figuring out my character's lineage, like to me it's always been a little bit more like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Like it's gonna be ridiculous.
I mean, this game does have very dark and gruesome overtones, but there's a lot of funny written into it as well. For me, it always tends to go in a slightly more comedic turn.
I mean, I think horror movies are usually hilarious. Very rarely are they actually scary.
I don't know.
So,
I get scared by those newer ones that are really suspense filled. I can only watch like 1 or 2 of them in a week at most, and then I'm like, okay, I'm done.
Okay, well they make me jump. I don't know. There's something about them that's kind of funny to me. What kind of stories outside of games brought you inspiration for Vast Grimm?
There's little Easter eggs like all riddled throughout of pop culture references of things that I like to watch. Like one of the people that played, we had a game and they realized that their class skill was energy vampire. That was the name from that, and the way it's described is completely a reference to Colin Robinson on What We Do in the Shadows, and he totally picked up on it. And from as soon as he did that, like it was like 5 minutes into game, he completely changed his personality and how his character talked and spoke, and he played it like he was Colin Robinson. And like even there were a couple of quotes like that I picked up on that he used when talking to other people in his Legion that were just pulled straight from the show, and it was beautiful. So there's
That's
little
pretty
things,
funny.
yeah. There's little things like that are just like, okay, yeah, I love this. We're gonna throw a little of this in just to reference things that I think would be funny in game, and so yeah, that was good. I'd
On
have
the
to.
darker side of Vast Grimm, I kind of picture in my head a little bit of Event Horizon.
Hmm.
I don't know if you guys have seen
Yeah.
that.
I
Oh,
can
I love
totally
that
see that.
movie. Some
And
people
Yeah.
hate that movie, which I do not understand. I loved that movie.
yeah, I see also a lot of influence on the gross side of some horror movies where it's more just like special effects, like blisters and bubbles thing bursting and popping, and like I really like Slither as a like sci-fi horror comedy.
This is kind of a rabbit hole tangent, but did you know that Event Horizon actually it is almost completely a different recut than it was originally filmed to be because of the original version apparently was so violent and disgusting that they wouldn't allow it to go to theaters, and so the version that ended up going to theaters, like really important stuff got cut out of it, and all of that original footage is gone now. That
Oh,
original director's cut is it's sort of a legend, but it was real, but it's gone, unfortunately.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's too bad.
I remember hearing something about that a lot was cut or somehow it was reworked, but I didn't realize that it was that is totally gone and the reason for that.
Yeah, there's been efforts to try to find some of that footage, but I don't think they've had any luck. I guess it's just probably went in a dumpster or something.
I guess, if I was the director of that movie or the writer or whatever, I think I would just go ahead and claim, look, it was the greatest movie,
Of course.
greatest piece of cinematic art
Yeah,
in the history of mankind. But it's gone now, so
yeah.
just trust me on that.
Stupid.
Well,
network
maybe that's
decisions.
actually what he's doing. Maybe that's why he's saying it was like, oh, it was so filled with gore and it was just so intense, you know.
Yeah,
But
it's
actually,
kind of
the footage that was lost was probably like nothing. Like there's just them eating
it's
lunch
kind of
and
like
stuff.
the Tenacious D song tribute. They
Yeah,
can't remember the greatest song in the world, but they wrote a tribute to the greatest song in the world.
Hmm.
They played it.
Yep.
Tenacious D reference for everybody. We did it.
Excellent.
Check that one off the list, guys.
Done.
okay, I think we can all agree that Deus Ex Machina plot devices are usually a bad idea to save players in tabletop games, or at least I hope we can agree on that. And for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it is an old idea from like plays and writing, and it translates into God from machines. And what it represents is an event in a story that completely and effortlessly solves all the problems. It's just like the conflict is just gone. One of the earliest games of D&D I ever played in, I accidentally lit a pastry golem on fire, and unknowingly it fire made this creature more powerful, and I basically created this immortal being that we could not kill because we were level 2 or something.
Did you say a
And
pastry golem?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
what I'm wondering.
Because
Yes.
you're not gonna
It was-
you're not gonna do that with fire. You're gonna burn that shit.
Well, that's what didn't make sense to me, but apparently that's what was on the sheet. And the guy that was running the game was like a friend of a friend, so I didn't really know him that well. It became clear that we couldn't kill this thing, and so his solution was the most Deus Ex Machina device I've ever seen, which was a giant sword fell from the sky and just chopped the thing in half. And then we basically were supposed to just go about our business.
See?
Which was difficult for us because we were like, where did this thing come from? Like, like, I don't know if it basically just completely ruined any kind of immersion that we had in the game.
Oh man.
So, my question is, do you have any good Deus Ex Machina stories from your games, either as a player or even instigating one yourself?
I'm sure growing up, I'm sure I did some, but my memory for that sort of thing is just terrible. So if Ross were on here, he'd probably remember me doing something like that over the 20 years of running games for him and our friends that I've done, but probably not any time in recent years, because I tried like. There's no big things like that usually happen. I remember one of my friends in high school, when he would run games, he would threaten a giant finger to come down out of the sky and come down and squish your character if you didn't make decisions and keep moving with the story.
Did that ever actually happen in the game?
I
No,
would have
it was just
pressed
a
that.
threat. Yep.
I rolled a dodge,
So,
tumble.
so have you ever saved your players from death? You know, when they definitely should have died, and you just for some reason felt like you needed to save them.
Yeah, I've fudged rolls, which is one of the nice things about Vast Grimm and Merkborg. Like, I'm not rolling damage, and I'm not rolling whether or not you get hit or not as the GM. You're rolling to dodge, and then
Mhm.
you're rolling the damage that's coming at you. So I can't really save you.
David, what about you?
Luckily, I've never played in a game where that actually happened. Like even the main storyline had repercussions in other ways that we as players hadn't even considered, and that's good things. I think that makes a good GM is, nothing is truly black and white. There's gray, and what you think is right you could find out, had a totally different outcome in one way or another.
Most of the groups that I've played with when I've run the games, they have played as good aligned characters, where they're and usually fantasy settings, where they're trying to be the heroes. One of my favorite things to do is whatever their actions are, especially if they don't exactly follow the story, and they kind of do things where I have to improvise. I love taking their actions that are usually not very well thought out and having them the repercussions of them turn against them so that they end up sort of being the villains. But like
Nice.
they're trying to be the heroes, but like for instance, I was running one game and like there's some orcs in this farm and they were like, well, we'll just burn down the house with the orcs in it. And of course, like I meant for them to go save this family in the barn. And so they ended up murdering this family along with the orcs. And so from that point on, they were basically like murderers and not heroes anymore. And
Huh.
it made the game a lot of fun. Have you guys ever done anything like that? Like where you basically take the character's actions and you kind of pervert them?
Well, I've always been a player. I've never played, I've never been a DM or anything, but I can remember this hilarious story that my DM used to say where he likes to mess with paladins because paladins are so rigid. They're lawful good or there's rules. And so he would try to really, as he would say, F with the paladin, right? One time, somehow, some evil character in the game, NPC in the game, tricked a paladin into killing a unicorn. He dropped a couple of levels because of it and had to go on some kind of pilgrimage to redeem himself and all of this other stuff. And it was a total con job to trick him into killing such a majestic creature.
The paladin deserved it. He
Yeah.
deserved it.
I mean, he asked for it the day he rolled, decided I'm going to be a paladin.
I don't think I've ever had anything where it turned that way unless the characters were intentionally doing something that was against whatever societal norms were in the game itself. I am though, however, known amongst my friends for trying to make them make decisions in a timely manner so that if they discussing keep discussing what they're going to do for quite some time, I'm keeping track of it slightly ish real time in game so that things continue to move whether or not they're going anywhere or not.
Putting it in Vast Grimm terms, some interesting positions to be in, I would think, is as a GM to try to put your players in would be like, for example, all not all harvesters are the same, but the harvester that I play in Vast Grimm, making him have to choose between like worms and his party members, make forcing him to make a choice, or not necessarily forcing him, but putting him in a position where it looks like the only choice is, for whatever reason, to save a worm or to save your party members, and to gore my harvester, that would be a difficult decision. And he would probably no, he would
He
save the
did.
worm.
He did save the worm, and he vented one of the other PCs. And
Yeah, that's true.
but at the same
That's
time,
true.
as the GM, that wasn't me pushing you in that direction. That was Bill playing his character pushing you in that direction.
Right. Yeah, you did not put us there at all.
No.
It's definitely Bill's character and my character, and they were just butting heads, butting heads. And honestly, David didn't want to do it, but Gore had no problem with it.
Yeah,
Like
that was.
David, like me, I actually felt bad. But if you're going to play your character, you got to do it.
And it was a
Well-
very good moment in the story because it made sense. And the group, the Legion that you all are a part of, I mean, aside from Lat's Emobot, are all, your character and Ria's character are pretty grimy people. Like you're not out to help people. You're out to help yourself. And
Right.
so, sometimes when you play Vast Grimm, you're playing on that side. Sometimes you're on the side trying to save humanity.
Yeah, we are not heroes. We don't even take baths. Even Lat's character, I mean, he's a robot.
Yeah. So in Vast Grimm, since there's not really an alignment system, not in the traditional sense, there are a couple classes that are sort of more over on the side of probably evil.
Yes, yeah.
But what if players want to do like a full out evil campaign in Vast Grimm? What would they be doing?
Well,
Have you thought about that?
I have, and so part of that is part of the reason we thought Ross and I thought about that was because we had already come up with the devout class, which are people who worship they and believe in ushering in the Grimm and the worms, and they want to bring humanity to its end. They are disciples of Fatuma, and so when we created that class, we realized, okay, we have all these classes. We can't have one that's just straight up, okay, they want the end of times to come. So we need to make another one that's kind of darker, which is how we came up with the Harvester, the class that will cut the worms out of bodies that have fallen in battle, and they will harvest these worms and sell them on the black market. And they're comfortable messing with these parasitic nasties, and they're grimy and kind of gross. So we thought if we had 2 out of the 8 classes lean on that side, if a group wanted to play the darker side of things, you could easily have the other classes lean into that as well, just depending on how you played your character.
You need to just create a worm campaign where everybody plays worm, and you're trying to jump from human to human,
Yeah,
Well-
that's
well-
it.
Um,
All the players are worms.
Well,
eat plant.
yeah, and once you embody the people and you are one of the Grimm, but you're actually the worm inside of somebody that's become one of the Grimm.
So Brian, you said you couldn't write a novel, but have you ever tried?
No, I've not. I've written a movie script years and years and years ago.
What was that about?
It was very much in the vein of like Mallrats or
I knew you were going to say that.
or like Clerks, but I mean, it was at the time, like I was working at 7-Eleven. I started working at 7-Eleven when I was 15. I worked there for like 3.5 years through high school. I worked at a 7-Eleven for 2 years in college in a different city, and then I went back to working at 7-Eleven for like 6 months after college. So that's kind of my mind, like how I saw dialogue working very much at that time was a direct influence from Kevin Smith, those Kevin Smith movies, because that's who I lived that life. I read comic books and all the same things. So it was very much like that. It wasn't anything else. But I've also, like, with the Revolo stuff, I've written movie pitches, but it's not something that's more like a couple page document just with the major beats of the story and the overarching themes and how it would relate to people.
There's a quote from Kurt Vonnegut that says every sentence must do one of two things: reveal character or advance the action. But one lesson I've learned when I play games, and like I always try to remember this if I'm ever doing any writing for an RPG game, I don't normally feel like the story is as important as giving the players very clear hints at the direction that they need to go in, even if they don't choose to go in. Like, I feel like the direction is really important, and if they don't know that, they panic and start lighting things on fire in the game, which I have seen happen.
That happens no matter what. I mean, that's the final answer.
Yep. Yeah.
Any problem really is just to set it on fire.
Do you have any rules for your writing? Like, you try to work into all your writing because it's like theory that you have?
For me personally, I have to remind myself to go back and be descriptive, because in my head, because I tend to do things in such a visual way with the sculpting and drawing and painting and things like that, if I don't force myself to think about it, I'll picture it in my head without picturing it in words. So I need to make sure that, for me, I have to make sure I go back in and make sure that happens.
I really don't know if I have any other questions on my sheet here. We went through them pretty quick without Ross. But
no worries. This upcoming week, Tuesday will mark a week until the end of the campaign. On Tuesday, I'm running a game for people that had signed up Tuesday morning, and then Wednesday there will be a actual play live streamed on Nerdarchy Live's YouTube channel. That will be 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Wednesday night on their YouTube. So that'll be a brand new adventure that I make up on the fly with the characters that they have randomly generated. And so that should be a lot of fun.
Some other things, we've got still more stretch goals that we have not revealed exactly what those are. And we look forward to continue making progress on the campaign and sharing those with you guys, because we know that everybody would be excited about them. So looking forward to that.
Yeah, and speaking of writing, I mean, we've been unlocking a lot of the one-shot campaigns by the guest writers, which is going to be really cool once we get to actually see what they come up with. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, as am I. Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody who listened in, and thanks for chatting.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
Everybody,
thanks,
enjoy
y'all.
your week. Thanks for supporting the campaign.
Yeah, awesome. Good night. Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks.
Bye.